What happens when a beloved music legend sits down for what should be a friendly morning chat, only to find himself under attack from a host who seems determined to tear him down? In just 35 seconds, one dismissive comment would spark a confrontation so intense that it would end with a guest storming off set, leaving a stunned panel and a host scrambling to justify her behavior. This is the story of how Lorraine Kelly turned a simple interview into a battleground, and how Cliff Richard refused to be her punching bag. The morning started like any other on the Lorraine Kelly Show. The studio lights were bright, the audience was settled in their seats, and the panel was ready. Sitting alongside Lorraine were her regular contributors, fashion expert Mark Hayes and entertainment correspondent Ross King. And they were there to discuss the latest celebrity news, offer their insights, and keep the conversation flowing. But nobody expected what was about to unfold. Cliff Richard walked onto the set to warm applause. He looked relaxed, wearing a smart blazer and an easy smile. This was supposed to be a celebration. He was there to talk about his latest music project, his decades-long career, and his upcoming tour. The audience loved him. The panel smiled and welcomed him. Everything seemed perfect. Lorraine greeted him with her signature enthusiasm, or at least that's what it looked like at first. "Cliff, lovely to have you here," she said, gesturing to the seat across from her. "Please, sit down." Cliff settled into the chair, still smiling. "Thank you for having me, Lorraine. It's great to be here." The first few minutes went smoothly. They talked about his new album, the songs he'd chosen, and the inspiration behind them. Cliff spoke passionately about his music, his eyes lighting up as he described the creative process. The audience listened, captivated. Mark and Ross nodded along, genuinely interested. Then Lorraine shifted gears. "So, Cliff," she said, leaning forward slightly, "you've been in this business for what, 60 years now?" "A little over that, yes," Cliff replied, still pleasant. Right, Lorraine continued. "And you're still touring, still recording. Don't you ever feel like maybe it's time to, step aside? Let some younger artists have the spotlight?" The smile on Cliff's face faltered just a bit. "I'm sorry?" "Well," Lorraine said, waving her hand casually, "you've had a wonderful career. Nobody's denying that. But surely there comes a point where you have to accept that your time has passed. The music industry has moved on, hasn't it?" A murmur rippled through the audience. Mark Hayes shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Ross King's eyebrows shot up. Cliff took a breath, clearly choosing his words carefully. "Lorraine, I don't think age should determine whether someone continues doing what they love. My fans still come to my shows. They still buy my music. I'm not taking anything away from younger artists. There's room for everyone." "Is there, though?" Lorraine pressed. Let's be honest, Cliff. When was the last time you had a real hit? Something that actually connected with people who aren't, your age?" Ross King jumped in, trying to smooth things over. "Actually, Lorraine, Cliff's last album went top 5 in the charts. That's pretty impressive by anyone's standards." Lorraine barely glanced at Ross. Top 5 among his existing fan base, sure. But that's not really breaking new ground, is it? Cliff's jaw tightened. "I'm not trying to break new ground, Lorraine. I'm trying to make music that means something. Music that brings people joy. If that's only reaching my existing fans, I'm perfectly happy with that. They've been loyal to me for decades, and I owe them everything." "How noble," Lorraine said, and there was an edge to her voice now. "But doesn't it bother you that you're essentially irrelevant to anyone under 50? That young people today have no idea who you are?" The audience gasped. This wasn't playful banter anymore. This was an attack. Mark Hayes looked genuinely shocked. "Lorraine, and that's a bit harsh, don't you think?" "I'm just being realistic, Mark," Lorraine shot back. "We're all thinking it. I'm just saying it out loud." Cliff's expression had changed completely. The warmth was gone, replaced by something harder. "Actually, Lorraine, I don't think everyone's thinking that. I think that's your opinion, and you're welcome to it, but I disagree entirely. Of course you do, Lorraine said with a dismissive laugh, because admitting that you're past your prime would mean facing reality, wouldn't it? Past my prime? Cliff repeated, his voice rising slightly. I've just completed a tour that sold out in 12 countries. I have an album that's performing well. I have fans who love what I do. That doesn't sound like someone who's past their prime to me. Lorraine leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. Cliff, come on. You're clinging to a career that should have ended 20 years ago. Don't you have enough money? Enough accolades? Why not retire gracefully instead of embarrassing yourself? The studio fell silent. Even the cameras seemed to stop moving. Ross King tried again. Lorraine, I really think we should move on to something else. This isn't fair to Cliff. Oh, Ross, please, Lorraine snapped. Stop defending him. We all know it's true. He's a relic. A nostalgia act at best. That was the moment everything changed. Cliff stood up. Not quickly, not dramatically, but with a deliberate calm that somehow made it even more powerful. You know what, Lorraine? He said, his voice steady and controlled. I came here today to talk about my music, to share something I'm proud of with people who might appreciate it. I didn't come here to be insulted by someone who clearly has no respect for me or my work. Oh, don't be so sensitive, Lorraine said, waving him off. I'm just having a conversation. No, Cliff said firmly. You're not having a conversation. You're attacking me, and I don't have to sit here and take it. Mark Hayes spoke up, his voice gentle. Cliff, maybe we can just talk about the tour. Tell us about the venues you'll be playing. But Cliff shook his head. I appreciate that, Mark. I really do. But I'm not going to sit here and pretend this is okay. Lorraine has made it very clear how she feels about me, and I see no reason to continue this interview. Lorraine's face flushed. So you're just going to walk off? How professional. More professional than what you've done here today, Cliff replied. You invited me as a guest, and you've spent the entire time trying to tear me down, telling me I'm irrelevant, that I should quit, that I'm embarrassing myself. Why? What have I ever done to you? I'm doing my job, Lorraine said defensively. I'm asking tough questions. No, Cliff said, his voice getting stronger. You're being cruel for the sake of being cruel. There's a difference between tough questions and outright disrespect. You've crossed that line multiple times in the last few minutes. Ross King stood up now, too. Cliff's right, Lorraine. This has gone too far. He's a guest on this show. He deserves to be treated with respect. Lorraine glared at Ross. Oh, so now you're ganging up on me. Nobody's ganging up on you, Ross said calmly. But you need to hear this. What you've said today is completely out of line. The audience started to applaud. Quietly at first, then louder. They were applauding Cliff, supporting him. Lorraine looked stunned. You're seriously applauding him for walking off my show? They're applauding him for standing up to a bully, Mark said quietly. Lorraine's mouth fell open. Excuse me? A bully? I am not a bully. Then what would you call what just happened? Mark asked. You attacked him from the moment he sat down. You questioned his relevance, his career, his choices. You told him he should have retired years ago. You called him a relic. How is that not bullying? Cliff began removing his microphone. His hands were steady, his movements deliberate. I've been in this industry for over 60 years, Lorraine. I've faced criticism before. I've had bad reviews, in tough interviews, difficult moments. But I've never, in all that time, had someone be so needlessly cruel. And I've certainly never had a host actively try to humiliate me on their own show. I wasn't trying to humiliate you, Lorraine protested, but her voice had lost its edge. She sounded defensive now, unsure. Then what were you trying to do? Cliff asked, looking her straight in the eye. Because it certainly felt like humiliation. It felt like you wanted to make me feel small, to make me question my worth, To push me into a corner where I'd either lash out or break down. Well, I'm not going to do either. I'm simply going to leave. You can't just leave, Lorraine said, and now she sounded almost panicked. We're in the middle of a show. Watch me, Cliff said simply. Ross stepped forward. Cliff, I'm so sorry about this. And you didn't deserve any of it. Cliff nodded, shaking Ross's hand. Thank you, Ross. I appreciate that. He turned to Mark. And thank you, Mark, for speaking up. Mark stood and hugged him. You're a legend, Cliff. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The audience was on their feet now, giving Cliff a standing ovation. He smiled at them, genuinely touched, and waved. Then he turned back to Lorraine one last time. You know, Lorraine, I actually used to respect you. I thought you were a professional, someone who knew how to conduct an interview with grace and intelligence. But today, you've shown me something very different. You've shown me someone who's willing to tear down a guest just to create drama, to get attention, to make yourself feel superior. And that's really sad. Lorraine's face had gone pale. Cliff, I think you're overreacting. Am I? Cliff asked. Let me ask you something. Would you have spoken to a younger artist that way? Would you have told someone in their 20s or 30s that they should quit? That they're irrelevant? That they're embarrassing themselves? Lorraine didn't answer. No, you wouldn't, Cliff continued, because you know you'd be called out for it immediately. But you thought you could say those things to me because of my age. You thought it was acceptable to be ageist, to dismiss my work, to belittle my achievements. Well, it's not acceptable. It's never acceptable. Ross nodded in agreement. He's absolutely right, Lorraine. What you said today was ageist, plain and simple. Mark added, and the sad thing is, you don't even seem to realize it. Lorraine looked around the studio. The audience was still standing, still applauding Cliff. Her panel was against her. Even the crew members looked uncomfortable. I was just trying to have an honest conversation, she said weakly. Honest? Cliff repeated. There's nothing honest about what you did. Honesty would be asking me about the challenges of staying relevant in a changing industry. Honesty would be discussing how the music business has evolved. What you did was attack me personally. Attack my character, attack my choices. That's not honesty. That's hostility. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair and folded it over his arm. I've given you more time than you deserve already, he said. I'm leaving now. And I genuinely hope that you take some time to think about what happened here today. Because if you don't, and if you continue treating guests this way, eventually there won't be any guests left who are willing to come on your show. Cliff, please, Lorraine started, but he held up a hand. No, I'm done. This conversation is over. He walked toward the exit, his head held high. The audience continued to applaud, many of them calling out words of support. We love you, Cliff. You're amazing. Don't listen to her. Cliff waved again, acknowledging their kindness, and then he was gone. The studio fell into an awkward silence. Lorraine sat in her chair, looking shell-shocked. Ross and Mark remained standing, neither of them quite sure what to do next. Finally, Ross spoke. Lorraine, I think we need to talk about what just happened. What's there to talk about? Lorraine said, but her voice cracked slightly. He overreacted and walked off. End of story. That's not what happened, and you know it, Mark said firmly. You pushed him too far. You were rude, dismissive, and completely out of line. Lorraine stood up abruptly. I don't need a lecture from you, Mark. Maybe you do, Mark replied, because clearly you don't see the problem with your behavior. The audience was murmuring now, many of them looking angry. One woman called out, You should apologize. Others joined in. Apologize to Cliff. That was disgraceful. You were horrible to him. Lorraine looked at the audience, her face flushing again. I don't have to apologize for doing my job. Your job isn't to attack people. Ross said. Your job is to interview them, to help them tell their story, to create engaging television. What you did today was none of those things. I was creating engaging television, Lorraine insisted. Conflict is engaging. Not when it's manufactured and cruel, Mark countered. There's a difference between healthy debate and what you did to Cliff. You didn't debate him. You didn't challenge his ideas. You attacked him personally. You told him he was irrelevant, that he should quit, that he was embarrassing himself. Those aren't interview questions. Those are insults. Lorraine sank back into her chair. For the first time, she looked genuinely uncertain. I didn't mean it to come across that way, she said quietly. But it did, Ross said. And the fact that you can't see that is concerning. Cliff Richard is a music icon. He sold over 250 million records worldwide. And he's had more than 130 hit singles. He's been knighted by the Queen, and you treated him like he was nobody. Like his career meant nothing. Like he had no value. Mark leaned forward. And the worst part, Lorraine, is that he handled it with such grace. He didn't shout. He didn't insult you back. He simply stood up for himself, explained why what you said was wrong, and left. He was the picture of dignity, and that makes what you did look even worse. The audience applauded again, this time for Mark's words. Lorraine put her head in her hands. This is a disaster. It's a disaster of your own making, Ross said, not unkindly. You could have had a wonderful interview with a music legend. Instead, you chose to create drama, and it backfired spectacularly. One of the producers appeared from offstage, Burrow looking frantic. He whispered something to Lorraine, who nodded stiffly. She looked up at the camera, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. We're going to take a quick break, she announced. When we come back, we'll have our cooking segment with Chef James Martin. The cameras cut, and the studio lights dimmed slightly. Lorraine immediately turned to Ross and Mark. This is going to be everywhere, isn't it? Probably, Ross admitted. Social media is probably already exploding. People are going to crucify me, Lorraine said, her voice barely above a whisper. You crucified yourself, Mark said bluntly. We tried to warn you. We tried to get you to stop, but you kept pushing. You kept attacking, and now you have to face the consequences. What should I do? Lorraine asked, looking genuinely lost. Ross sighed. Honestly, I think you need to issue a public apology. A real one. Not some half-hearted statement about being misunderstood. You need to own what you did and apologize sincerely. And maybe take some time to think about why you did it, Mark added. Because this isn't the first time you've been harsh with a guest. It's just the first time someone's walked off because of it. Lorraine nodded slowly, still looking dazed. Backstage, Cliff was gathering his things. A production assistant approached him nervously. Mr. Richard, I just want to say, I'm so sorry about what happened out there. That was completely unacceptable. Cliff smiled at her kindly. Thank you. I appreciate that. Is there anything we can do? She asked. No, I think I've said everything I needed to say, Cliff replied. I just want to leave now. Another crew member approached. Sir, for what it's worth, everyone back here thinks you were absolutely right to walk off. What she said to you was awful. More crew members gathered around, all expressing their support. Cliff was touched by their kindness. You're all very sweet, he said, but honestly, I'm fine. I've dealt with worse in my career. I just wish it hadn't come to this. We all do, one of the cameramen said. We love having you on the show. Well, we did before, this. Cliff chuckled. I appreciate that, but I don't think I'll be coming back anytime soon. Can't say we blame you, the production assistant said. Back in the studio, the break was almost over. Lorraine was touching up her makeup, her hands shaking slightly. Ross and Mark sat in uncomfortable silence. Are we really going to just continue the show like nothing happened? Mark asked. What else can we do? Ross replied. We still have an hour to fill. It feels wrong, Mark said, like we're just sweeping it under the rug. We're not the ones who need to address it, Ross pointed out. That's on Lorraine. The floor manager counted them back in. The cameras went live again. Lorraine's smile was firmly back in place, but it looked strained. "Welcome back," she said brightly. "Now, let's talk about something delicious. Chef James Martin is here with a wonderful recipe for—" But the audience wasn't having it. Several people stood up and walked out. Others sat with their arms crossed, clearly still upset about what they'd witnessed. Lorraine soldiered on, but the energy in the studio was completely different. The warmth was gone. The enthusiasm was gone. What remained was a cold, uncomfortable atmosphere that no amount of cheerful cooking demonstrations could fix. Ross and Mark participated in the segments that followed, but their hearts weren't in it. They kept exchanging glances, both clearly thinking about Cliff and what had happened. During another commercial break, Mark turned to Lorraine. "You know, the more I think about it, the more I realize how wrong that was. Cliff didn't deserve any of that." "I know," Lorraine said quietly. "Do you?" Mark pressed. "Because you need to really understand what you did. You didn't just have a difficult interview. You bullied someone. You used your position of power to make a guest feel small and worthless. That's not okay." Lorraine's eyes welled up. "I said I know." "Mark." Ross put a hand on Mark's arm. "Maybe we should talk about this later, off camera." But Mark shook his head. "No, this needs to be said now. Because if we don't address it, if we just pretend it didn't happen, then we're complicit. We're saying that behavior is acceptable. And it's not." The floor manager warned them they were about to go live again. Lorraine wiped her eyes quickly. "Can we please just get through the rest of the show?" "Fine," Mark said. But this conversation isn't over. The show continued, segment by segment, but it felt hollow. The audience remained subdued. The panel remained tense. And somewhere outside the studio, Cliff Richard was driving away, his dignity intact, his self-respect unwavering. He'd stood up for himself in the face of unwarranted hostility. He'd refused to be diminished by someone who thought they could use their platform to tear him down. And in doing so, he'd shown everyone watching what real strength looks like. It's not about shouting the loudest or getting the last word. It's about knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone make you feel less than you are. It's about walking away when staying would mean compromising your self-respect. It's about understanding that some battles aren't worth fighting because the person you'd be fighting isn't worth your energy. Cliff Richard had been a gentleman his entire career. He'd handled success with grace, weathered storms with dignity, and treated people with kindness. And when faced with someone who showed him none of those qualities, he didn't stoop to their level. He simply stood up, stated his truth, and left. Meanwhile, back in the studio, Lorraine was learning a hard lesson. You can have all the power in the world. You can have a television show, a platform, millions of viewers. But if you use that power to hurt people, to belittle them, to make them feel worthless, eventually it will come back to haunt you. The show finally ended. The cameras stopped rolling. The audience filed out, many of them still talking about what they'd witnessed. Ross and Mark removed their microphones without a word to Lorraine and headed to their dressing rooms. Lorraine sat alone on the set, staring at the empty chair where Cliff had been sitting just an hour before. The chair where a music legend had been forced to defend his entire career, his life's work, his passion, against baseless attacks from someone who should have been honoring him. A producer approached cautiously. "Lorraine, we need to talk about how we're going to handle the fallout from this." "I know," she said numbly. "The clips are already circulating online," the producer continued. "The reaction is, well, it's not good." "I can imagine," Lorraine said. "People are calling for an apology. Some are calling for more than that." Lorraine finally looked up. "I'll apologize. I'll do whatever I need to do." But as she said the words, she knew it was too late. The damage was done. Cliff Richard had walked off her show, and he'd taken his dignity with him. What he'd left behind was a cautionary tale about what happens when you mistake cruelty for courage, when you confuse attacking someone with holding them accountable, when you forget that every person deserves respect, regardless of their age or where they are in their career. The studio grew quiet as the crew packed up equipment. The lights dimmed, and in that growing darkness, Lorraine Kelly sat alone, finally beginning to understand the weight of what she'd done. Somewhere across town, Cliff Richard was having a cup of tea, surrounded by people who loved and respected him, already putting the incident behind him. Because that's what you do when you know your worth. You don't dwell on the opinions of those who can't see it. You simply move forward, secure in who you are and what you've achieved. And that, in the end, is what separates someone with true class from someone who only pretends to have it.